This just in, the Sacramento Kings have been relegated to the G League.
Hey, maybe they got a shot now.
Check it out.
What's up, Kings fans? Welcome to episode 10 of the Royal Report with Calvin and Barry, a Sacramento Kings-based sports talk show. Another sobering week for the Sacramento Kings as they drop all 4 games this last week and are on track, or actually are on a 9-game losing streak, which is tied with the Houston Rockets for the worst current losing streak in the league. It's been a really tough week for us Kings fans. I want to give a quick shout out to all the fans still out there, everybody that's bleeding purple. We just got to stick together, guys. I know it's tough. There will be brighter days, I promise.
That's right, it's always darkest before the dawn, and it certainly feels that way in Sacramento right now. On today's show, Barry and I will put ourselves in Monte McNair's shoes. We'll take a sneak peek at the upcoming NBA draft, and we're going to turn on the trade machine as the deadline approaches. But we begin, as always, with highlights from around the league. The Kings aren't the only team that's on a current losing streak. The LA Lakers, who were once one of the best teams in the league, have now dropped their last 4 consecutive games. Obviously, a lot of that is due to injury. Not having Anthony Davis in the lineup is a huge loss. He's out with a calf strain and will be reevaluated in 4 weeks. So the Lakers will be without him for a lot longer. But the Lakers have had more problems than just Anthony Davis being out. In those 4 games, they failed to score 100 points in 3 of them, including a blowout loss on Wednesday night to the Utah Jazz, 114-89.
Wow. The Lakers are still the favorites to win the title according to Sportsbook, and LeBron James has gone on record saying that he's not worried about this current losing streak. He thinks that it will actually help them once they reach the playoffs. In other league news, the NBA logo discussion has popped back up again. I know it was mentioned briefly last year after the tragic passing of Kobe Bryant. There was some designs circulating around of Kobe replacing Jerry West on the logo. I know there's a lot of good perspectives on both sides, but go ahead and let us know down in the comments below on whether you think Kobe should take over that logo or if you still like Jerry there.
Yeah, it's a very interesting debate there. I, for one, I wouldn't really be too upset if they changed the logo to Kobe, but that's just my opinion. Underrated is not exactly the word that I would use to describe Zion Williamson. However, with the year that he's putting together, not enough people are talking about it. Zion is on pace to join some elite company. He could join Shaq and Wilt Chamberlain as the only players to average 25 points or more per game and shoot at least 60% from the field in a season. Zion has scored 30 points in 8 games this year, and he shot at least 66% in 7 of those games. He will also make his first career All-Star appearance in a couple weeks.
I don't want to toot my own cowbell, but Zion was my pick for most improved player a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sticking with it.
It's looking good right now.
The second half of the NBA schedule has been released. It is another difficult stretch for the Sacramento Kings, but there are a few notable games on the schedule. There's 2 games against the Thunder, back-to-back, 3 games against the Lakers, the Wolves, a game against the Pistons, the Cavs, and 2 games against the Wizards. All teams on the bottom of their respective conferences. And it'll be interesting to see how that number 1 through number 5 pick shakes out.
Yeah, so clearly that we gotta start taking some more pride on the defensive end. That's another game where guys just really got whatever they wanted.
Welcome back. It's time for your Sacramento Kings Weekcap. This is another week that we could probably just throw away if we were really being serious about it, but we're here and we're going to break it down. The Kings are back to their matador defensive ways. That was the main area of struggle for them in all 4 of these games. They just allowed teams to score at will and shoot unbelievably well from the field. I I wrote down the shooting percentages that they gave up this week. Saturday against the Bulls, Chicago shot nearly 60% from the field and 48% from three. Sunday against Milwaukee, the Bucks shot 49% from the field and nearly 40% from three. Tuesday against Brooklyn, the Nets shoot 49% from the field and 42.5% from three, and they followed it up last night with a beautiful game against the Knicks, where the Knicks, who are one of the worst offensive teams in the league, shot 58% from the field and nearly 53% from three. Barry, what is going on?
Oh man, I feel like the Kings need another break. Not a COVID outbreak, but a break from some games so that they can refocus their defense. You mentioned it, the shooting percentages are off the charts for the opposing team. And you know, a thing about the game last night against the Knicks are the worst offensive team in the league. And they set a franchise record this year of 140 points in that last game against the Kings. So that right there tells you where the Kings are at. 0-4 this week, losses to the Bulls, the Bucks, the Nets, the Knicks. Obviously, you're not penciling in W's for all four of those games, but you'd like to see them go 2-2, 1-3, 3-1, anything but an offer. And that's what they gave us. So unfortunately, there needs to be some more huge strides made on the defensive end. On a positive note, Tyrese Haliburton has been balling. He's averaging almost 20 points a game over the last 4 games. And Marvin Bagley's been playing well as well. He averaged 17 points a game over the last 4 games. So happy to see the young guys getting some minutes, playing well. Unfortunately, it's not leading to W's at this point, but I think we might finally reach the point in the season where we just got to give the young guys minutes and let them grow and not worry about W's. What do you think, Cal?
Yeah, they really look like a different team than they were a couple weeks ago. I'm not going to use the term they quit, but they look like a defeated team out there. There's very little energy. They just really don't seem to have the same sense of competitiveness out there that they had. Really, it wasn't that long ago. I know it feels like an eternity to lose 9 games in a row, but I think you're right. The young guys are going to get some minutes here, and it's great to see that Bagley has produced when his number has been called. Tyrese, we know he's been playing well all year long, so that's no big surprise to anyone. But we're getting to a very critical point in the season right now. Not just the trade deadline coming up, but there's some real questions that need to be answered right now for Sacramento.
Yeah, we're 44% of the way through the season, and the Kings are 8 games under 500. So not a place that I want to be. They just haven't been well. You look at the bottom of the standings, you have the Houston Rockets, 9-game losing streak, Sacramento Kings, 9-game losing streak, and you have the Minnesota Timberwolves, 6-game losing streak. I know we all mentioned Detroit being on the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings, but you know, they have played consistently for a losing team. The Kings have been up and down, a roller coaster, and as we mentioned last week, injury has been the main source of troubles over the last 2 weeks. I wish we could blame it all on injuries, but every team deals with them. So unfortunately, it is what it is. We'll be right back. We'll jump into the trade machine.
Welcome to a new segment on the show called Trade Time, where Barry and I are going to turn on the trade machine. We'll take a look at some potential deals that have been floated around out there in the NBA rumor land, and we'll tell you if we think they're good deals or not for the Sacramento Kings. Let's take a look at our first one.
This first deal here is a very controversial one, especially for Sacramento Kings fans. You don't see De'Aaron Fox mentioned in a lot of trade rumors. Obviously, he's the franchise player, best player on the team, and just signed a brand new max extension. So you don't expect him to switch teams anytime soon. But you look at a deal like this, you have the option to get an all-star caliber player in Bradley Beal. You're giving up 2 starters. One of them, who you might have found a replacement for him in this last year's draft. Calvin, what do you feel about this deal?
Well, this is obviously a hard one to think about, and I wore my De'Aaron Fox jersey just for this particular topic here. No one wants to see De'Aaron traded, let's be real about that. But you have to, as we're going to do later in the show, put yourselves in the shoes of the general manager, and when you're thinking about the long-term ramifications of a deal like this, when a guy like Bradley Beal, a player of that caliber, becomes available, and that's if. We don't know that that's a for sure thing or not yet, but if he does become available, all bets are off. I mean, you have to look at every single option that it would take to acquire somebody like that. You take a look at what the Kings have done traditionally as a small market franchise. It's hard to lure in big name free agents. So you either have to hit big time in the draft, or you have to be aggressive and make some sort of big time deal that's going to dramatically improve your franchise. And I don't know how dramatically it would to trade a guy like Fox or Bradley Beal, but Bradley Beal is a top 10 player in this league, and we all hope that De'Aaron Fox will become that one day. But this is something that I think would be worth exploring at the very least, if it's still a possibility. And part of the reason for that is because you have such a luxury in your back pocket like Tyrese Haliburton, a guy who can step in and take over the point guard role for Fox if he is to be moved. And then you have a backcourt of Bradley Beal and Tyrese Haliburton, which sounds like a pretty good backcourt to me, don't you think?
Yeah, it sounds like a great backcourt. And I love Fox, we all love Fox, but you look down at the numbers, Fox is going to be the only guy on this team that's going to command a huge asking price as far as the trade go. He is obviously the Kings' most valuable piece, and he's locked up long term. One thing for me is De'Aaron Fox has been adamant about wanting to stay in Sacramento and how much he loves the city, which is one of my hesitations in making this deal. But if I'm going to trade for a guy like Bradley Beal, who's been in a crazy situation in Washington and hasn't wanted out, and he's stayed dedicated to that team, I feel like another small market team like Sacramento could probably offer him the same situation, maybe a little bit better. But when you're drafting best available, you're going to end up in these kind of situations because you're going to draft a player that's going to be a replacement for your best player. And it is what it is. I think a Beal-Fox backcourt is better than Fox and Haliburton. I think a Haliburton-Beal backcourt is better than Fox and Haliburton. So it just goes to show the Kings have some options. It's good to have two legit starting point guards in the NBA, which I feel that Haliburton is becoming. We'll see how it shakes down. Let's take a look at the next trade idea.
So this next deal, to me, would be a huge win for the Sacramento Kings. Not only do you add another primary scorer in Tobias Harris who can go alongside De'Aaron Fox, but you grab two players who solve major issues for the Kings. Consistent shooting from three and defense, primarily defense, in Danny Green and Matisse Thybulle. Thybulle is a young player. You'd be giving up guys like Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, and Bjelica. Hield and Bjelica don't play much defense. And Harrison Barnes, we would hate to see him go, but Tobias Harris is a much more complete scorer, I would say, than Harrison Barnes is. He's having a fantastic year this year, and I think this would be something that Philadelphia would be interested in too, because they've been rumored to be interested in Buddy Hield for a long time now. They've also been rumored, and it has been proven, that they've been looking for floor spacing for quite some time. So getting guys like Hield and Bjelica solve those issues, and if you look at it from their perspective, adding a guy like Harrison Barnes for Tobias Harris, not so much of a drop off there. He's a guy that you could immediately put into that starting 3 or 4 spot in place of Tobias. So
yeah, this is a home run for the Sacramento Kings. I don't know if this deal is even possible. Maybe the Sixers are going to want a couple picks to add on top here. But it is an absolute slam dunk for the Sacramento Kings. You trade out Harrison Barnes for, as you mentioned, a more consistent shooter, a more consistent scorer in Tobias Harris. I know he doesn't do all the things that Harrison Barnes does, But I think if you pick up Thibault and Danny Green, you can make up for some of those. It shores up the defensive end for the Sacramento Kings. It also brings in another NBA champion in Danny Green, and it provides some more shooting for the team. So all around, great move for the Sacramento Kings. Sign me up if it's available.
What do we got next?
The next trade we got here is an interesting one. As we mentioned a few weeks ago, doing a deal with the Boston Celtics is always tricky, as Danny Ainge has seemed to squeeze out every bit out of every trade he's done in the past 5 to 10 years being with the Celtics. But Buddy Hield for Marcus Smart and Tristan Thompson. Calvin, how are you feeling about this deal?
This one's pretty interesting to me. I'm not so sure how realistic of a deal this is. I think it would be a huge win for the Kings to get a guy like Marcus Smart. Tristan Thompson, another, you talked about championship pedigree, a guy with a lot of playoff experience. And also that could be a potential lifesaver if Rashawn Holmes ends up signing with somebody else. You would have someone to fill in for his spot. From Boston's perspective, they're kind of a wild card right now. They're slumping big time. Danny Ainge, I think, was on record saying they hit rock bottom the other day when they lost to the Atlanta Hawks. So who knows? They might be looking to make some sort of big change out there. And I don't think, Harrison Barnes probably makes the most sense from the Kings standpoint, but I don't know how well he fits into their rotation in Boston with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. So get a shooter like Buddy Hield, the Celtics might just go for something like this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, another great trade for the Sacramento Kings if they don't have to give up any draft picks. I've been a huge fan of Marcus Smart ever since he came out of the NBA draft. Tristan Thompson, as you mentioned, championship pedigree with the Cavaliers. Two awesome role players that aren't overpaid and they know their role. I think it would be great for the Kings. Brings more defense, brings more size, more rebounding. Might be a little tougher in the bigs rotation. It might clog it up a little bit, but I would expect if this deal went down, we'd probably see another one involving Bjelica, maybe Holmes or Bagley. So we'll see.
Or even Whiteside.
Or even Whiteside.
For that matter.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to the next one here.
All right, so this last trade proposal here is an example of high risk, high reward for me. Obviously, a backcourt of De'Aaron Fox and Victor Oladipo would be potentially fantastic. Great defensively. They could get out and run, and two very accomplished scorers in their own right as well. I think PJ Tucker would be a very valuable piece to add as well. Marvin Bagley, one of the things we've talked about a lot with him is his corner three shooting and how he's been very efficient from that spot this year. Doesn't get any more efficient in the corner three than PJ Tucker. Plus, he's a fantastic defender, can guard multiple positions. But to me, this deal is all about a potential draft pick from Houston. If you could somehow squeeze out a first-round pick from Houston in this deal, that way you really improve your draft chances in the offseason, and also you add a little bit of insurance there with a pick in case Oladipo or Tucker, who are both going to be free agents at the end of this year, don't end up re-signing with Sacramento.
Yeah, it's always tough to trade players that are locked into contracts for expiring deals, especially expiring talented players that are going to have a market in free agency. It would be a great deal, I think, if we were able to re-sign both of those players. But I think the risk might be larger than the reward in this deal. I really like Victor Oladipo. I'm a big fan of PJ Tucker. I think this deal would allow the Kings to finally open up and get loose and run more and still be able to play some consistent defense. But I think the risk is too high here. So I'm not doing it unless I'm getting at least 1 or 2 first-round picks that are not lottery protected from Houston.
Yeah, lottery protected is the key phrase in that statement. The pick would have to be unprotected for sure. All right, we're turning the trade machine off. We'll be right back with more of the Royal Report.
Welcome back. As you can all see, Calvin's got his De'Aaron Fox jersey today. Unfortunately, De'Aaron Fox was not named to the All-Star team. He was not a starter or a backup or an injury replacement. Snubbed once again. Very unfortunate for many Kings fans, myself included. We've been very adamant over the last few weeks to try and get all the fans out to vote and get him to the All-Star game. But it didn't happen. And to be honest, I'm not really surprised. You look at a list of guys that started or made the All-Star team instead of him, and I don't really see a fill-in for Fox there. It's Chris Paul, Damian Lillard, Donovan Mitchell, Paul George. Do I think that De'Aaron Fox is better than any of those 4 players? That's a tough assessment. As a Kings fan, I want to say yes, but probably not. I think he has maybe an edge on Chris Paul in the fact that I would rather start a franchise with De'Aaron Fox at this point in his career over Chris Paul. But I think that Chris still has a couple good years left. So unfortunately, another year for the Sacramento Kings with no All-Stars.
Yeah, another year with no All-Stars, but man, I just, when I look at the All-Star list, we all agree that De'Aaron Fox is deserving of being an All-Star, but it just goes to show how many good players there are in this league. The names you just listed, those guys are all reserves for the for the All-Star team in general. I guess it's not West and East anymore, but those are some great players, man. It's just really hard to crack that list these days. There are a lot of great, both veteran and young players out there who are all deserving of being All-Stars, and hopefully next year is the year for De'Aaron. But on the bright side, he didn't want to play in this game anyway. He was very adamant about that. So at least he gets to relax and take a break and doesn't have to go down to Atlanta now.
And work on his defense. We'll be right back. It's never too late to look forward to the next NBA draft. Sitting at 0-9 since the Super Bowl, it doesn't get much better than to start looking now. So, Calvin, assuming the Sacramento Kings stay on course and don't pick up any other draft picks from other teams, who would you be targeting in the draft?
Well, if they stay at their current pace right now, the Kings should most likely pick somewhere in the 4 to 7 range. If they're going to be picking on the high end of that spectrum, at number 4, there are 2 players in particular that I would be looking at to target for the Kings. Both of them happen to play on the G League's Ignite team. If anyone is unfamiliar with that team, they're changing the landscape of how players prepare for the NBA. They are offering contracts to players straight out of high school, and this team is mostly comprised of high school prospects right now. 2 in particular are the guys that I would be looking at for the Sacramento Kings. Number 1 is Jonathan Kuminga. He is the number 1 rated prospect in the class of 2021. He's off to a great start down in Florida. 6'8" wing, playmaking forward with tremendous defensive potential. Definitely a guy that the Kings could use big time. And then the other one is Jalen Green, who is the number 5 rated prospect in the class of 2021. Jalen Green is a 6'6" pure shooting guard who can score with incredible ease. He's even been compared to a guy like Bradley Beal. So those 2 guys, they're not going to fall much farther than 4 or 5 anyway. So I would definitely be drafting one of those 2 guys if I was sitting in that spot for the Kings. Are there any guys out there aside from those 2 that you would be looking at, Barry?
I personally don't feel like the Sacramento Kings are going to stay the course and end up with the same draft prospect that they're projected at getting now. I think that they're either going to make some moves, bring in some guys and win some more games, or they're going to end up tossing some guys out and losing a ton of games, or picking up some additional draft picks, as we had mentioned earlier in the show. So, that being said, a few things that could happen. First off, the Kings will most likely be in the draft lottery. I know they don't have a high odds so far of winning the draft, but it's possible they could win one of those top 3 picks, or if they don't win those top 3, they might be 4 or 5. If the Kings do end up winning the draft, one guy that I would really like to target is Evan Mobley out of USC. He's a 7-footer. He is projected at number 2 right now in the draft. And I'll give you a quote from a draft insider. A guy you can build a defense around. I don't think that, I think that explains exactly what the Sacramento Kings need right there, is a guy that you can build around. And I think the Kings have shown during this past year that they are going to take best available. And if he's available, it doesn't matter what other centers or bigs they have on the roster. They're going to take the best available player. So I'd really look out for Evan. Another guy I'm really interested in is Jalen Suggs. He's projected top 5 pick. He's a 6'4" guard, and he is considered one of the best on-ball defenders in the draft. A lot of defensive guys at the top of this draft, so a lot of different options for the Sacramento Kings. I love the 2 guys that you mentioned as well, but I'm going to throw one more guy out here for you, and that is Cade Cunningham. He's a 19-year-old wing player, not a great defender, awesome shooter, but he's projected to be number 1, and he's probably going to be the best player in this draft. So if I'm the Sacramento Kings and I win the draft lottery, I'm taking best available. He's going to be on my team.
Yeah, you certainly can't go wrong with any of those players, and that's the luxury that you have when you pick in the top 4 of the draft, right? So I would be happy with any of those guys.
And here's my question for you, Calvin. If they win the draft and they get another 6'4" guard, who's playing what?
That's a very good question. You would definitely have some questions to be answered if you're the head coach of the Sacramento Kings. But Monte McNair said it before the draft this year, right? It's best available. So whether that's at number 12 or it's at number 4, you take best available player and then you move accordingly from there. So they would probably have to shuffle some guys around and make maybe some other deals. But best available player is the way to go, especially at that high of a pick. The Kings have had some major up and downs this season, and we have talked about it in the past, how much of that responsibility falls on the shoulders of Luke Walton. Obviously, he's frustrated just like we all are. We saw him break that whiteboard last night, against the Knicks. Barry, I'm not really sure what the long-term answer is necessarily going to be. I personally was never a fan of Luke Walton being the head coach once Monte McNair took over. I thought that was a good opportunity for them to get somebody new in there and start the new journey with the new front office as well. I just don't think that Luke Walton is the guy for Sacramento. He's had an opportunity now for a while to be with this team that's been, for the most part, intact the whole way. They've obviously had some injury problems, which he isn't in control of. But when I watch the Kings play, I just don't get the sense that he is the master motivator that I think of as a head coach for guys at the highest level. I know that Luke Walton has definitely shown me that he can be a great schemer. He comes up with excellent plays, whether it's out of timeouts or to start a game, to come out of the locker room at halftime. He seems to be very adept at drawing up sets and plays for the Kings to run, and he can get buckets, in critical times, or at least get guys the opportunity to have a good shot. But when I think of a head coach, I think of somebody who is tough as nails and who is going to be, the driving force behind his players constantly giving great effort and wanting to be successful in this league. And I'm just not seeing that from the Kings. And again, I don't know how much of that is actually Luke Walton's fault. Maybe the Kings players just aren't the right mix, and for whatever reason, they're not motivated enough themselves. But I do think that moving forward, it's time to start looking at a fresh start when it comes to the coaching position for Sacramento?
Yeah, you look at Luke Walton's resume and it seems like he'd be the perfect coach in the NBA. You know, he learned under Phil Jackson, won a couple championships, played with some superstar players, did some time as an assistant and kind of slowly moved up the ranks, but he just simply hasn't got the job done. You look at a career coaching record for a guy like Luke Walton, 156 and 212. 156 wins and 212 losses. This is for a guy that's coached LeBron James, Brandon Ingram, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, De'Aaron Fox. He's coached a ton of good players. And it just comes down for me, if you can't win with LeBron James, you're not going to win on the Sacramento Kings. So Luke Walton needs to go. I don't expect him to finish the season. I think Alvin Gentry will be the man in charge by the end of the season.
Yeah, they do have an abundance of experienced assistant coaches. Alvin Gentry has been a head coach for a long time in this league, so they certainly have that sort of luxury to fall back on if they were to make a change. I've said it before, I'm not a huge fan of firing a guy midway through the season, especially a team that doesn't, if you're not one of the bottom two records in the league like Minnesota or Detroit currently hold. But I do think that it is time to start looking at a change, and if you have somebody like Alvin Gentry on the bench right now, you're in a better position to make one of those moves than a lot of franchises are. So it'll be very interesting to see what Monte McNair does going forward, and I think the trade deadline is probably going to be a tipping point one way or another when it comes to the coaching staff as well, don't you think?
Totally agree.
Yeah. We'll be right back with more Royal Report.
We've got some pretty big shoes for you to fill.
Good worker around here?
Well, sure, but no, size 16 shoes.
On this topic, we are going to be jumping into Monte McNair's shoes and trying to make some decisions as GM. They are some big shoes to fill, and speaking of big shoes, I have a surprise for you here on the show. As many of you already know, I am a sports memorabilia collector, and we have a pair of Shaquille O'Neal autograph size 27 shoes. Look at these things. They are humongous. So very big shoes to fill. Anyways, that brings us on to the GM shoes to fill. And they are very tough shoes to fill, as I mentioned. But before we can decide what Monte is going to end up doing, we have to look at what his biggest dilemmas are. And that brings us back to player personnel, schematics, coaching, draft, free agency, all that wonderful stuff. And so Monte really needs to decide what his path and his route is going to be and stick with it. Is he going to continue to build through the draft? Is he going to try and bolster the team through free agency? Or is he going to make a big splash trading before the deadline? Still yet to be seen. Calvin, what's your take on this?
Well, I'm still really blown away by the size of those shoes. That's all I can think about right now. But it is a very difficult task for any GM, really. It doesn't really matter what your franchise is or what position you're in. But particularly in Sacramento, I think if you're Monte McNair, you have to understand where you are and what your franchise has. Obviously, not just assets, but what you can do in terms of your market. For me, Sacramento has never been a place that has been desirable for free agents, big name free agents. So while that doesn't mean that you don't go out and try to sign some people, you have to be planning for that you're not going to get those top tier guys. So there's only another, one or two other options out there for me, and that's to aggressively explore trades that are either going to improve your roster or acquire draft picks and other assets. And they have to hit on those draft picks too. As a small market team that has trouble, landing big name free agents, you've got to draft well. And they are on a good track right now. They've gotten De'Aaron Fox. They drafted Tyrese Haliburton this year. That's a great start, but it's got to continue. And it doesn't matter if you're at pick 4 or you're at pick 24 or 44. You've got to be able to find those guys who are going to give you some sort of positive input to your team and help build a winning franchise, ultimately. And when I think about it, the Kings, the last time they were really considered a good team in this league and really relevant in the league, they made some of those aggressive moves that might have been considered unpopular in Sacramento. They traded some very, very popular players in Kings history. In '98, they traded Mitch Richmond and Otis Thorpe for Chris Webber. And in 2001, they traded Jason Williams and Nick Anderson for Mike Bibby. Big time names that we're talking about in terms of Sacramento Kings history, but the guys that they got back were the ones that actually made them a winning franchise and took them over the hump. You know, that was the team that arguably could have won an NBA title. So I think if you're Monte McNair, you have to be looking at all options, and you can't really leave anything off the table at this point. And you got to be aggressive is the main point.
You definitely have to be aggressive. I think the Kings have shown over the last offseason that they are willing to bring in the guys in the front office to make the correct decisions and to start drafting well. And Vivek is kind of going to stand back and let his guys do what they're paid to do, which is great. As a Kings fan, I am very, very happy to see that. But if I'm Monty, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first call around teams and I'm going to kick tires on a few players. I'm going to kick tires on Tobias Harris, like we mentioned earlier. I'm going to talk about Victor Oladipo. I'm going to give Dallas a call about Porzingis. And my first and last call are going to go to the Wizards for Bradley Beal. If none of those guys are available, I think it's time to just blow it up. I think you need to pick 2 or 3 guys on this roster that you're gonna keep, and they're gonna be the cornerstone franchises of this team, and everybody else has to go. I think that has to be Fox, Haliburton, and potentially Bagley, or 2 out of those 3. You pick your 2. They gotta stay, everybody else has to go. We need expiring contracts, we need future first-round picks, we need capital for this team to build with. Sometimes it's not all about what a specific player can do for your team on the court. Sometimes a player is more valuable in what assets they can bring you from another team. And I think the Kings have quite a few valuable pieces that a lot of teams would be interested in. Harrison Barnes, as you mentioned earlier in the show, having the best career season of his entire career. And this is a guy that already won an NBA championship. So I think his draft stock is really high right now. We got to figure out what's going on with Rashawn Holmes, if he's going to be re-signed or if we need to flip him for somebody else. Got to figure out what's happening with Marvin. He's only playing 25 minutes a game. Luke Walton has been reluctant to play him in the fourth quarter in games where the Kings actually have a chance. So is Marvin going to be the future, or do we need to ship him off for a guy like John Collins or Porzingis? And then you got to lastly figure out what's going on with Buddy Hield and the whole guard rotation. I think once you figure out what you're going to do with those and you design a path and you stick with it, I think the Sacramento Kings will be all right.
And not to mention, we just talked about it, but coaching staff as well. That plays obviously a big role in that. And we both are in agreement that Luke Walton's not the long-term answer. I would like to see them try to give somebody a new opportunity here, someone that you not necessarily have heard of majorly or hasn't even had an opportunity to be a head coach in this league. I think a new face, some fresh blood would really go a long way. There's got to be a bunch of guys out there who are highly qualified for that job. You know, Steven Silas is an example of that, waited a long time for his first head coaching opportunity. You know, I would really like to see the Kings do something like that instead of going after one of these guys who just continues to run circles around the league and coach all these different teams like a Doc Rivers, for example.
Yeah, and the Kings just simply aren't ready for a coach of Doc's caliber yet either. You look at what the Warriors did. It took a Mark Jones, or sorry, not Mark Jones. It took a Mark Jackson to develop those young players and give them the confidence and bring them on the right track. And then once you brought in Steve Kerr, they were ready to win. I think without Mark Jackson, that doesn't happen. And so the Kings need to find that guy that can empower his players and give them confidence and teach them how to win early on.
Without a doubt. That's all the time we have for this segment. When we come back, it's your time. Questions from the Kingdom.
I'm telling you, fellas, you're gonna want that cowbell.
Welcome back. It's time for our favorite segment, Questions from the Kingdom, or Cowbell questions as we like to call them. The Royal Report is nothing without our fans, and we love hearing from you. So if you have questions for next week's show, please submit them down below this video in the comments screen. Let's get our first question from our announcer.
Is Alvin Gentry a better choice to lead the Kings?
Well, I think the better question here is Alvin Gentry the best option or choice for the Sacramento Kings, not the better choice? I'm not sure that Luke Walton or Alvin Gentry would be my long-term pick at head coach for the Sacramento Kings. I will say if the Kings are going to make a move right here and right now, I think he is a better choice to be running this team than Luke Walton. But Alvin Gentry has had a long list of success in this league, but not so much playoff success, not so much postseason experience, really, if you will, as a head coach. So to me, again, like I said earlier in the show, I would much rather them go the route of a new, fresh face, somebody who's going to bring new life and new energy into Sacramento.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I don't think Alvin Gentry is the long-term answer for this team, but I think he's the best coach for the rest of the season. I think that once you start losing this many games, you start to tune your coach out. You don't listen, you don't play as a team. And sometimes a fresh start, a new voice, although he's already been there, he would be a new voice as head coach of the Kings. And I think that is much needed. So I'm all on board. I hope Walton gets fired in the next 2 weeks. And I want Alvin to lead the team for the rest of the season. He's already got a great relationship with Buddy Hield. Maybe he can bring Buddy on track. But it's really going to come down to the trade deadline. What happens? Are we building for the future? Are we demolishing what's here now? Who's going to be responsible for the losses for the rest of the season? And that's what it comes down to. Next question.
Who is the future point guard of the Sacramento Kings?
Well, I think this is the toughest question we've probably had here on the Royal Report. I'm split. I'm really split on this. I feel like De'Aaron Fox is the future. I feel like Tyrese is the future. I just don't know how it's going to work out. I want to say Tyrese Haliburton is the future point guard of the Sacramento Kings, and the reason I say that is simply De'Aaron Fox is worth more in the trade market. And I think that the Kings would be better off trading him and bringing in more assets than trading a guy like Tyrese and not getting as much in return.
Yeah, this is a very tough question, and it's a tough question for me. I'm kind of surprised that it wasn't an easy answer for you, but we all know how much Barry loves Tyrese Haliburton. If I had to really come down to it, though, I will say this: De'Aaron Fox is a fantastic player currently. Tyrese Haliburton is not far away from being a great player in this league, so it's almost pick your poison type of situation. But when I think about building a team, I think Tyrese Haliburton's game better complements more players that you could add to a potential roster alongside him than De'Aaron Fox's game does. Fox is primarily a scoring guard. He does look to get others involved, and his assist numbers have been great this year. But I think that Tyrese's game is better built as a true point guard. You could put more around him. He's obviously younger, although they're both young, so it doesn't really matter too much which way you go there. But if I'm trying to build a championship level team, Tyrese, I think, gives me more flexibility with my roster while still providing me with an all-star level point guard. And so I will say that Tyrese is the future.
Yeah, and Tyrese, as you mentioned, he's younger, doesn't make as much money, and he's just more versatile. He can play fast, he can play slow, he can play in full court, he can play in half court offense. I love De'Aaron Fox. Really happy to have him on the Kings, but ultimately I think the Kings' ceiling is higher with Tyrese at the point. Next question.
Are you happy with Marvin Bagley's playing time?
Yes, I am happy with his playing time. I feel that Marvin, we've mentioned it many times, the biggest thing is to remain healthy. So, we have to make sure that he can consistently play big minutes throughout the course of an entire season. And he has slowly gotten better and better as the year has gone along. And it's hard to argue with having him in the lineup late in games because, as we mentioned on a previous show, that lineup that they've been running with Holmes, Harrison Barnes, De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Haliburton, that lineup has been so good for them. And they've outscored opponents big time late in games or whenever they've been on the floor together. So I think Marvin's minutes are totally okay where he's at right now, and he just needs to be focused on getting better every day.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm happy with Marvin's minutes up to this point. I know Walton hasn't played him much in the fourth quarter, and I think the reason for that is Marvin's game is a little predictable. He doesn't pass the ball a lot. He tries to get the ball down in the post and bang inside, or he shoots corner threes. I think that Marvin needs more experience playing in the league, and that's just simply because he hasn't been healthy for this long. I'm happy with the minutes he's had so far, but I need to see increased minutes for him through the rest of the season. Once we've reached this point where winning is not the ultimate goal for each game, Marvin needs more time. He needs to develop, and he needs to become a player that can play in crunch time. And to become that player, unfortunately, you have to play in crunch time. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there, but I'm looking to get Marvin some more minutes in the second half of the season.
Yeah, you make a good point there. You gotta, at some point, you have to see what you've got, what you're working with, right? So we should see Marvin's minutes increase, I think, especially if the Kings continue to lose games, unfortunately. Next question.
What team in the NBA has had a similar path to success as the Kings?
Another tough question here. I don't know if there's a team that has a similar path as the Sacramento Kings. The Sacramento Kings are such a unique team in the fact that they have been bad for so long, and they're in this small market, and they just simply haven't hit on these draft picks. You look at a lot of these other small market teams in similar situations as the Kings. One I want to point to is the Oklahoma City Thunder. They were not a great team in Seattle towards the end, got a bunch of good draft picks, and they end up leaving the city. The Kings were mentioned to leave Sacramento a few years ago, and they ended up staying. And they've had a bunch of top draft picks. They just simply haven't hit on very many of them. I think the main difference between the Thunder and the Kings is they hit on 3 draft picks in a row. And that's what led to the success that they've had. So the Kings have kind of been their own worst enemy at this point. And I feel that there are some other small market teams that they could look at to try and build a similar path. But as we mentioned earlier in the show, you got to hit on those draft picks, especially for a small market team.
Yeah, so that to me the question is more so because the Kings have had success, but not a ton of success. The question is more so, what is the model out there for a team like Sacramento to achieve that success? And if you're thinking about a team that's small market, doesn't attract a lot of big name free agents, builds through the draft and free agency, there's one team and one team only that comes to mind for me, and that's the San Antonio Spurs. I mean, you get incredibly lucky to have a guy like David Robinson. He gets hurt. Then you end up with Tim Duncan in the draft, and all of a sudden you've got this great team.
And a Hall of Fame coach.
And a Hall of Fame coach. So yes, they definitely had some advantages that Sacramento doesn't currently have. But they were able to sustain that success rather for a long time, and it wasn't just because of Tim Duncan and Greg Popovich. They were able to draft extremely well. They found glue guys in free agency. They found guys that would play for less money because they didn't have as much available as franchises like the Lakers or Boston, big market teams. So to me, it's pretty obvious there's one team's model in a small market world as to who you go off of, and that's the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah. I think you hit it right on the head there. And, you know, another thing that the Kings and the Spurs have in common is they both love international prospects. And they've done really well in that field. So thanks for your questions today, guys. Don't forget to submit them for next week's episode. And we'll be right back with the end of the show.
Shots. Another steal. And it's going to be more fast break points. They lead the league with 21 fast break points a game.
That's our show for this week. Thank you as always for watching. We've hit double digits, big milestone here on the Royal Report. Kings have a 4-game slate coming up next week. They'll take on the Detroit Pistons tonight, followed by the Charlotte Hornets, and then a couple of big-time Western Conference games against the Lakers and the Trailblazers.
Yeah, one more week of action to wrap up before the All-Star break. Couple notable games. The Pistons, worst record in the East. Kings have a chance there. An exciting matchup between two Rookie of the Year candidates in Tyrese Haliburton and Lonzo Ball in the Charlotte matchup. And then the Lakers are still without Anthony Davis and on a slide as well. So another team and another game where the Kings have a shot at winning. And then that fourth game you mentioned, the Blazers. They have been red hot as of late. And C.J. McCollum should be coming back soon. So it'll be interesting. The last game before the All-Star break is always a toss-up. Both teams seem to kind of be checked out, but we'll see what happens. Let's hope for a good week, Kings fans. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all next week. Go Kings!
Go Kings!
Thanks, guys.